Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Using Sustainability as a Competitive Advantage, brought to you by the Clover Imaging Group. My name is Tim Cahill. I'm the Director of Sales with Clover, and I will be your host today. But before I introduce today's presenters, I would like to review a few quick housekeeping notes. All of our attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A section. Once a question is answered, the question and the respective answer will become visible to all audience members. If we are unable to answer your question live, we will follow up individually after this meeting. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so if you have a hard stop or if anyone in your organization is unable to attend today, we will provide you with the full presentation recording via our website. If you have missed any of our webinars, the recordings are available to view at any time on your dashboard of the cloverimaging.com website. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. We have our SVP of Sales, AJ Brazel, SVP of Global and Public Sector Sales, Steve Noyes, Director of Marketing and Sustainability, Kelly Posh. Today's presenters are going to cover a host of topics. They're going to cover what is the sustainability opportunity, where can you find your target audience, what is the sustainability pitch that will have the highest impact, what resources are available to you, and then we will wrap it up with the Q&A section for any of the outstanding questions. So with that, I will pass it over to our first presenter, Kelly Posh.
Thanks, Tim. I'm excited to talk to everyone today about what is the opportunity for sustainability. There's really nowhere you can go these days and not hear about ESG, climate change, global warming, and the harmful effect of single-use plastics. Just last week, President Biden announced that he may be invoking a national emergency over climate change. And for years, Clover never really led with the sustainability portion of our value proposition. We positioned ourselves as the OEM alternative. We focused on our quality, our performance, and the value. And that's not because our products have not always been environmentally sustainable. By its essence, a remanufactured printer cartridge reuses an OEM shell, which is by far an environmental superior choice, even over recycling. But times are changing. Leading with environmental sustainability, and in times of economic challenge, coupling that with the cost savings our products offer is a very powerful way to gain new business. The global sustainability market was valued at around $10 billion in 2020, but by 2030, it's expected to be almost $75 billion. In HP's latest sustainability report, this is a mind-boggling number, and they were able to track over $3.5 billion in new sales in which sustainability criteria were a known consideration. So why is all this happening now? Over the past few years, nonprofits and public interest groups have sprung up across North America with the sole focus of pushing environmental change. An additional factor is that by 2025, 75% of the workforce will be millennials, and environmental sustainability is an issue that they care deeply about. And so in response to this, we've seen increasing regulations and initiatives in both government and private sector to tackle the environmental crisis that we're facing. Next slide, Tim. And so where are we seeing most of the opportunity? In all honesty, we're seeing it everywhere from the federal government to state and local agencies. We're seeing it in higher education institutions. We're seeing it in publicly traded companies. We're seeing it in companies with private equity investment. We're seeing even SMB customers now focused on science-based sustainability targets. And we're seeing a great increase in the number of sustainability departments. And so we're going to take a few minutes and we're going to dive into each one of these markets. I'm going to hand it over to Steve Noyes first, and he's going to talk about public sector.
Hey, thank you, Kelly. And my name is Steve Noyes, as Kelly mentioned, and we're very grateful that you're sharing time with us today. We want to welcome old friends and new friends. And I think everybody listening would agree that the federal government has created a new awareness through regulations and commitments that focus attention on environmental sustainability and climate change. For example, in the first 19 months of President Biden's term, he has signed over 30 executive orders that support various environmental initiatives. These include the plan for net zero emissions from federal procurement and overall federal operations by 2050. This includes a 65% emissions reduction by 2030. This focus continues in the state and local government arena. For example, on June 30th, California passed SB 54. This delivers the nation's most far-reaching restrictions on single-use plastics and packaging. This bill requires that by January the 1st, 2028, at least 30% of plastic items sold, distributed, or imported into the state must be recyclable. By 2032, that percentage increases to 65%. We can also reference that the city of Los Angeles unanimously passed a resolution to ban single-use printer cartridges, also known as compatibles. In the higher education arena, the Association for Advancement of Sustainability has been leading with a green agenda since 2005. ASHE is comprised of over 900 members across 48 states, 1 U.S. territory, 9 Canadian provinces, and 20 countries. And next slide, Tim.
And I'll talk for a few moments about what we're seeing on the business side of things. In a recent study by IBM, they found that 9 out of 10 companies surveyed say that they are working on sustainability initiatives across the organization. And this study included both large enterprises and SMB customers. And obviously, we're starting to see it first from the publicly traded companies. In March, the SEC put forth a proposal for mandated and standardized ESG reporting and metrics. And I just want to pause there for a moment, and I want to make sure that I define ESG in case that's not something you're familiar with. ESG is a term that you're starting to hear replace sustainability, and it stands for environmental, social, and governance. And it's an all-encompassing goal, and in many cases now a business strategy that is used to measure the ethical and sustainable health of a business. It includes all the environmental aspects that you're most familiar with, as well as metrics around diversity, workplace rights, and working conditions. And so what we're seeing is that the publicly traded companies that we've spoken to, it's not a question of if these regulations are going to happen, it's a question of when they're going to happen and when they're going to start being enforced. And so those companies have already started to plan for that. They have committees, they have environmental scientists and engineers already tasked with figuring out how they will be able to ensure compliance. And so one of the questions I received pre-webinar was, I understand how this affects enterprise businesses, but how do I communicate this to SMB? Well, what we're starting to see is we've seen several supplier agreements. Just personally, I've seen those, and I know that there's a lot more out there where they're now requiring suppliers to document their contribution and responsibility to helping them meet their climate goals and commitments. And so this is obviously going to start trickling down, and now's the time for SMB customers to take action, and you can help them be part of that solution. In a survey done by Quo Circa, they interviewed 212 IT decision makers. 84% are now prioritizing suppliers that offer sustainable products and solutions, including sustainable ink and toner. And so another area where we're seeing increased focus is companies with private equity investment. These private equity firms have a vested interest in ensuring that their portfolio companies have an ESG strategy in place. BlackRock is probably the most notable one, with the removal of board members who are not meeting ESG commitments. We're also seeing organizations with science-based sustainability targets that they're putting out there on their websites, that they're communicating via other websites, where they're committing to meeting these time-bound sustainability targets. And overall, the industries with the largest percentage of companies with these quantitative time-bound targets include the food and beverage industry. 86% of those companies now have created those targets. Transportation and technology hardware, apparel, finance, utilities, and oil and gas companies are all focused on this. Next slide, Tim. And in response to trying to meet all of these new initiatives, we're seeing a rapid growth in sustainability departments. So there's now 25,000 people in the United States that have sustainability in their title. And that includes everything from a chief sustainability officer, director, manager of sustainability. I've actually had some meetings where we talked to somebody in the zero waste program, and they love our product because it's a product to them that is following the circular economy, is considered zero waste. We've also had some calls with people who are considered sustainable procurement. So they actually reside in the purchasing department, but dotted line to the sustainability department. And so what we see is that they're now gaining greater influence into the purchasing process, and they can serve as that advocate and influencer. And your best case scenario is to be able to have somebody from procurement and sustainability in the same room, because you can obviously talk about how you can help them reach their sustainability goals and reduce their carbon footprint, as well as save them about 30%. And as the economy tightens up, this is definitely going to be, something that they're very focused on. Next slide, Tim. So where to find these targets? So Clover is part of the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, and we're working with them on defining standards and greener standards for purchasing printer cartridges. There's also ASHI, which Steve touched on. There's 900 members of higher education institutes across the United States. They all have documented what their sustainability initiatives are, and you can see exactly how they're implementing those across the institution. State and local websites, you can look at those websites and see who's in their sustainability department, who's in charge of their zero waste program. Two other great sites are sciencebasedtargets.org. They have 3,000 organizations on there with science-based sustainability targets, as well as the UN Global Compact, and that has over 14,000 companies who have committed and documented their sustainability efforts. And then the NIGP, this is an organization for procurement professionals. They have chapters all over the US. They do reverse trade shows and expos. And more are starting to see sustainability on their agenda. And so now that we've talked a little bit about the opportunity, I'm going to turn it over to AJ to talk a little bit about how to communicate the value proposition.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. And I'm excited for everybody to be here. And obviously, Kelly had started off the presentation by talking about where our current value proposition is and where we've been in the past. And all of you should be at this point very familiar with and comfortable selling our products from a quality or cost saving standpoint. But talking about it from a sustainability standpoint and working with these types of companies that have these measures is a little bit different. And so I want to jump into that a little bit and go over some of the things that I think it's important for you to have in your back pocket whenever you're discussing our cartridges or selling our solutions into an environment that does have metrics to meet for sustainability targets. So Tim, let's go ahead and jump into the next slide. And so this first slide should be very familiar to all of you. Everyone here, I hope at this point, our reps have educated you on the differences between our cartridges from a remanufactured standpoint in comparison to the compatible clone market and the OEM market as well. And we'll start with the OEM. From a sustainability standpoint, it's a good cartridge. It's got a high-grade plastic that they've used in the manufacturing that can be recycled. We can use that for remanufacturing. It's going to have a very high quality print, and it's going to be a little bit less of a value proposition because it's going to have a little bit of a higher cost associated with it. A lot of cases, unfortunately, those cartridges are right now being manufactured and coming from overseas. So there is a little bit of a hit from a sustainability standpoint when it comes to transportation and getting those cartridges over to North America, as you can imagine. Now, the next two buckets, the compatible clone and then the remanufactured, it's important for us to take a step back and look at the differences between these cartridges, not only in what you're actually getting, but the name. Steve Noyes has talked to a lot of people about this on this call, and I love what he always has to say. I mean, the compatibles and the clone market, you've got a lot of people in the sled industry that have sustainability goals that will put out bids, RFQs, whatever it may be, but they'll spec those bids to say OEM or compatible or OEM or like cartridge. That opens the door up for this middle group of cartridges, which do not hit sustainability metrics for those customers. In the federal government or in the sled market, you get what you spec for. So you've got to look out for those types of opportunities and look out for those types, that verbiage, to make sure that you go back and educate the bidder to make sure that they're actually looking for a remanufactured cartridge. So make sure that it does state remanufactured. And the reason being is that those compatible and those clone market, there is a subpar manufacturing process that goes into those cartridges. They're going to use subpar quality of materials, including, and most importantly, the plastic. The plastic on those cartridges is brittle. It's not as high integrity as the OEM plastic. We can't even manufacture off of those cartridges. So whenever those cartridges come back through our recycling process, we take those, and it's one of the only things we throw into the landfill. We can't use them. Furthermore, the Asian market, who's responsible for manufacturing these cartridges, actually send them over to the United States and then doesn't want them back. So they send them over and leave them to be in US landfills, which is not ideal at all. And we'll go over that in the next slide as to what the environmental impact of that is. They're imported. Once again, it's going to take more, a bigger hit to sustainability in terms of transportation and getting those cartridges over here. And the other thing that you need to know about that plastic is that it's such a low quality grade of plastic that whenever it goes into a cartridge or into a machine and that machine heats up through the print process, it actually warps the cartridge, and there is carcinogens and other toxins that can actually escape from that plastic and go into the environment, the print environment. Less than ideal. So it's going to fail to meet health and safety regulations as well. So none of those situations add up to a good, green, sustainable cartridge, unlike ours, where that remanufactured verbiage, that remanufactured word is so important. We reuse an existing OEM cartridge. It's going to have the integrity of that core, the integrity of the plastic. It's going to give you a good quality print. As all of you probably are familiar with our cartridge right now, we take quality very seriously. So we make sure that what goes out into our customers' hands is going to meet the OEM standards. But furthermore, it supports a circular economy and the circular life cycle of that cartridge. Kelly touched on that a couple of slides ago. Extremely important. We'll go over that a little bit more in detail in the next couple of slides. We consume less natural resources as a result. We have a lower carbon footprint. And maybe most importantly, or nearest and dearest to my heart, you're going to support the North American economy. Once again, cutting down on transportation issues with when it comes to sustainability and pollution, but also, everybody wants to support something a little bit more local. So let's go on to the next slide, and we're going to kind of dig into some of the statistics that we see when it comes to recycling cartridges. And I think the thing that everybody should, really focus in on this slide is that 350 million number. That's how many cartridges end up in US landfills every year. 350 million cartridges. And a lot of those are due to the fact that either people are choosing not to recycle or they're buying cartridges that cannot be recycled. Every single one of those cartridges adds up to at least up to 2 pounds of plastic or metal for each individual cartridge. So, times that by 2, 700 million pounds of garbage going into the landfill every year. Less than ideal. On top of that, it takes 1,000 years for those cartridges to completely decompose. So, you see 2019, we're in 2022 now. In 3022, a cartridge that gets thrown away today is still going to be there. Go back to 1922, we didn't even really have toner cartridges at that point. So really nothing has completely decomposed at this point. And we're just putting 700 million pounds on top of it every year. Not a good situation. On top of that, in terms of other natural resources that it takes to produce those cartridges, every brand new cartridge on a toner side takes 3.5 quarts of oil. On the ink side, 2.5 ounces of oil. All of these statistics can be mitigated by utilizing our product. You see in the bottom corner, 97% of a toner cartridge can be reused in our remanufacturing process. None of the oil or a fraction of the oil takes to reproduce those brand new cartridges is going to be used. Most of the components, everything is going to stay out of the landfill. All good things and all things that you should be equipped with from a knowledge standpoint when you're talking to these end users with sustainability goals. So Tim, let's go to the next slide and talk about the circular economy, which is becoming increasingly important buzzword when you're talking to certain customers. There's actually bids out there that spec for this and want to make sure that there's a circular economy in terms of the product that they're buying. Our cartridges are completely done. Everything from the reclamation to the distribution of the cartridges are done in-house by Clover. In an ideal world, we bring those cartridges in through our recycling programs. They go to our processing center, into our component reclamation area where we have individuals who are trained to look at those cartridges and sort through, weed through the stuff that we can't utilize, and pull together all the stuff that we can and put that to the remanufacturing facility, which are robots. As you all know, they build the product for us, take out that repetitive motion and make sure that we've got a quality product from day in and day out in our manufacturing process. So we test all of those cartridges, STMC certified, make sure that we post-test, get those back out into your hands for resell, knowing that you've got a quality product that's been recycled. Now, the goal is to get those cartridges back again. And we bring those back once again through the recycling process. It goes through the same, all the same stages. Once it gets to that reclamation, if our associates deem that something is end of life, can't be reused, you actually see it go into the middle part of the circle here. goes to disassembly. We pull out all the stuff inside that actually can be reused, bring that back to remanufacturing. Everything else gets sent to our grinder. We grind up the plastic of the cartridges, and then we reuse or resell the plastic into different environments to make sure that it's being reused. So we mitigate the amount of stuff that's going to the landfill. And the grinding process is outlined on the next slide. So Tim, let's jump over to that and talk about just really quickly the grinding process here. And I'm not going to go into each one of these steps in detail, but you see the cartridge evaluation, disassembly, sorting, grinding, and then step 5 is the most important, and I think most impactful, is that plastic that's ready for use. We grind that up into a fine particle that we can reuse, resell to different places. And the thing that's important about that is a lot of our partners actually reutilize that plastic for remanufactured or recycled office products. One of my favorite things is the park benches. Probably if you've talked to me, you've heard me talk about that, where next time you're at a park, if you sit and you're sitting on a bench that's made of that plastic material, that could have been a toner cartridge in a past life and maybe one that you sold. So it's pretty cool stuff. And we're excited that that's part of our process and something that you should be very aware of when you're talking to an end user. And so on the next slide, in a little bit more detail, Kelly's going to actually go over our comparative life cycle assessment. Before she does, let me just reiterate that those cartridges that we get back that are compatible clones, we can't put them through that grinding process. The plastic is so brittle, it can't be resold. So they have to be thrown out. So just something to consider if you see those compatibles out there. But I will turn it over to Kelly now to make sure that she goes over this life cycle assessment, because I know she spearheaded the project internally and is going to be a little bit more apt to speak about it than I am.
Thanks, AJ. In June, we were excited to roll out our 2022 life cycle assessment. This is something that we worked on for 18 months. It really reinforced the findings of the previous LCA that we completed 10 years ago, but we wanted to have refreshed data for all of our partners. It's over 150 pages long, so it's very detailed and in depth. We hired Aspire Sustainability for this project. They're well known in the LCA space. They work with large companies like Apple, Kohler, and HP. We also had our study reviewed by a critical peer review committee who critiqued and analyzed the methodology. And what we did was we studied 2 HP toner cartridges versus the Clover equivalent. And in all categories studied, which include carbon footprint, energy footprint, natural resources, and human health, the Clover cartridge had less of an impact. In fact, the impact was almost half in all categories, and in some cases, much more. We go way into more depth on this. If you go to cloverimaging.com/LCA, there's a 4-page PDF that you can download that has all of the highlights of that study. And so that's a great thing to share with somebody in a sustainability department, because they'll really understand what all of those terms mean. There's also in the partner marketing portal, there's a 1-page LCA that you can actually add your logo to and send that off as a piece, just to be able to, as a lead piece that really explains right off the bat, how can a company cut their carbon footprint by 50%? This is an option for them. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back over to AJ. He's going to talk a little bit about collections.
Thank you, Kelly. And so we've kind of gone over the finished goods side of things, the actual cartridges, and why that supporting those and utilizing those is going to help you in certain situations that have sustainability metrics. And we'll get into a little bit more of the pitch here in a second. But I'm going to steal another quote from Steve Noyes, who's on the call. And green is good, but greener is better. And one of the things that I think all of the dealers and our partners that are on this call, I'd love for you to, understand and make sure that you're aligned with us on these is some additional offerings outside of just our cartridges that can help you in those bids, in those competitive situations where having a little bit more emphasis on sustainability is going to help you have a leg up of your competition. And the first and foremost, and possibly the easiest one to go over, and the one that most of you are familiar with, is our recycling program. Recycling is obviously the lifeblood of Clover. We've got a very robust program. I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but know that as long as you're recycling with Clover and utilizing us and not and sending us back the cartridges that we need and not some of the stuff we talked about that cannot be reutilized, it is a free program and something that we want to partner with you on. We can send out labels. We can do pallet pickups. We can work with you on individual customers to make sure that they're going to add in a recycling solution that is easy to use and helps the environment. More importantly, maybe even for the dealers on this call, is there's a lot of situations recently we've seen where customers are not ready to pull the trigger in terms of changing from a vendor to a brand new supplier for cartridges. So sometimes getting in on the recycling side is a good leg in or a good lead in to a customer. You can utilize this program to get familiar with the customer, their decision makers, their habits, their print environment, and then also they can get familiar with you from a dealer standpoint, from the customer service, and just know that you're a good company to work with, and that provides a good lead whenever you do undoubtedly go into quote on their business later. So we're starting to see recycling as a lead into a lot of these customers. But furthermore, on the next slide, we're going to show you a couple of the things that we can do from metric standpoint to help support our recycling program. We've got a ton of data that comes with recycling through a Clover program that we can break down from a dealer standpoint. So everything that you recycle with us, or your customers, everything that they recycle from a specific end user location, as long as you're not picking up and sending back directly to us. Those that, for example, on this report you see here, we can break this down to an individual end user and show how many inkjets for this one, 4,300 inkjets, 9,500 toner cartridges, and assortment of other stuff that have been kept out of the landfill. You see the amount of pounds that we have kept out of the landfill in those situations. And then there's a ton of other statistics here: CO2 emissions, carbon sequester, good stuff that a customer can utilize in their social media feed to help them hit or advertise their sustainability measures. All great stuff. But for the dealer, the most important thing, and some of our savvy reps have started to use this, so you might already be aware of this, but we can actually get down to the line item data from an end user. So once again, if you're using this as a lead into a customer, it gives you insight in their print environment. You can see exactly what they're recycling, so you know their usage, you know what cartridges they're using. We can tell you if it's Chinese compatibles, if it's OEMs. We can give you some competitive insight into that customer if you're only recycling with them. So it's a win for the dealer, and then all these metrics are great for a customer. On top of that, the next slide, we're going to show you another option that you've got from a sustainability offering, and that's our partnership with a company called Print Relief. I don't think a lot of you probably are familiar with Print Relief. It's a very great company. I'm very proud that we've gone into partnership with these guys. And really it's utilized to offset consumption of paper. So we talk about going to a paperless society. Companies want to print less. And a lot of that has to do with pricing or costs associated with printing, but some of it has to do with green initiatives. And it's because, you're deforesting areas to get to that paper. Now, Print Relief latches on to a data collection agent, and it actually counts pages at the user level, and we can partner up with you as the dealer and with Print Relief, and we'll actually reforest an area and plant a tree for every 8,333 pages that customer prints, which is equivalent of a tree. And then we'll provide that data back to customers. They can pick an area that they want to reforest. It's all great stuff. I love this program, and it's something that really is a differentiator when you're talking to some of these sustainability officers. The awesome thing here is you see the stat at the bottom. Since 2015, we've planted over 700,000 trees. I'd love to see it get to 1 million here in the upcoming couple of years, and partner with some of you dealers that are on the call, helping you close some deals. So all of those things are add-ons to help you in certain situations on top of the cartridge. But let's finish up with probably the most impactful slide when it comes to the pitch. And this is where I think everybody needs to be very comfortable, and that is pairing it together with cost savings. The whole, everywhere you go right now, you hear the word recession. Everybody's probably bracing for a situation where money and cost savings is extremely important. One of the things that we continuously see is that going green, whether it be going to a carbon neutral or trying to up a recycling or sustainability from a company standpoint, is more expensive to do what you're doing. Now, from an cartridge standpoint, we may have one of, if not the only product out there that is recycled, remanufactured, whatever it may be, that costs less than the original equipment manufacturer. And you see here rough numbers. Some of you probably know 26X at $217, but rough numbers, $217 for a 26X. For our cartridge, it's $121, $122. We're going to sell that to you for far less than that. So you're going to boost up the margins on the account. make a little bit more money for your dealership. But over the course of it, and a year, if that customer uses 70 cartridges, you're going to save them $6,600 in a year. And you think about a lot of these companies that do have sustainability measurements or metrics, they're going to be using way more than 70 cartridges. So it's an exponential growth in terms of how much you can save a customer. The great thing about this is if you get in with a sustainability officer, you can really push this message, because a lot of times these guys are fighting the CFO or finance in order to try to advocate to do what they think is right. But a lot of times that costs more money. So here's a win-win for your customer. They're not going to have to sacrifice quality. They're going to be utilizing a green solution that's recycled. It's put in through that circular economy, and also on top of it, save a ton of money. That's where that's the meat and potatoes. Is this slide right here. If you need help at all with talking to customers, engaging with customers, please let us know. And I'm going to actually turn it over on the next slide to Steve Noyes to kind of go over a couple of additional things that he's done or is doing internally to help our dealers be successful in the market.
Hey, thank you, Jay. Yeah. So how can we collaborate to advance office printing sustainability? An answer is that we can fully leverage the focus on the circular economy. We can investigate, identify, and promote the environmentally preferred purchasing policies of the federal government, state and local governments, the education vertical comprised of K through 12 and colleges and universities, and the contract commercial channel. Our targets include anyone with environmental compliance jurisdiction, the purchasing authority, and budget responsibility. For example, we can promote that the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council and the Responsible Purchasing Network advocate that policy that AJ referenced earlier. Green is good, but greener is preferred. The federal government has long endorsed and advocated the policy of use, reuse, recycle. Recycle's good, but reuse is better. We can help advocate for the procurement of Clover products and Clover-powered brands like Ability One Skillcraft and the private label brands from our partner wholesalers. On any of the sources sought notices, the request for informations, the bids, the request for quotes. This includes the twin strategy to submit a pre-award protest. This will help shape and influence the bid. We can also encourage all of our partners to quote the Clover alternative. Even when the bid has language that specifies OEM only, take that extra step to partner by educating your contact how they can best satisfy their purchasing objectives for environmental sustainability and save up to 30% compared to the OEM. For example, we want to educate that consumer that the terms compatible and remanufactured are not interchangeable. The points to remember is the clone compatibles lack an agreed upon uniform definition, production methods, performance testing, and quality standards. The single-use plastic is not green, and it represents a challenge to recycle. Conversely, the term remanufactured is universally codified by industry, associations, academia, and the DSA. The term has a legal case precedent that clarifies the difference. Clover provides product content, educational and marketing collateral for end users, and flyers that can be customized. These resources include emails, social media postings, presentations, and videos, and the environmental calculator. I'll turn the microphone over to Kelly to highlight her partner marketing portal.
Thanks, Steve. So if you have not yet used the partner marketing portal, if you log into the Clover Imaging website and you look under resources on the right-hand side, you'll find a link to the partner marketing portal. Everything that we are doing in regards to branding and driving our value proposition, we are also creating a version for our partner community. We realize that the way to get our message out is through our partners. So everything in there you can customize. As Steve mentioned, there's social media posts, there's emails, flyers, presentations, and then there's videos. The videos we do have to customize for you, but there's a request form in there where you can go ahead and request that we add your logo and contact information. We're actually going to send you a video after this meeting when we send you a replay of the webinar. And there will be a new video in there that's really an educational piece. One of the things I've been seeing coming in the Q&A is how do we educate our end users? We have a new piece that we really think helps, and it's just very simple. It's not very salesy, and it just talks about what are the different kinds of cartridges and what happens when I try to recycle one of those cartridges. Because in short, people don't understand that when I purchase a Chinese compatible cartridge, I cannot recycle that. So we want to create awareness around that. So you'll be receiving that video after this call. And the other thing that we're doing is we're creating end user pieces. We started doing this for some of our larger SLED accounts. So we have some SLED accounts where we have 14,000 end users in 400 locations. And so the issue that they're having from the sustainability department is they're all on board, procurement's all on board, but when an end user goes to their portal to purchase their products, they purchase the OEM, and just because that looks like the right cartridge for their printer, and that's what they're used to doing. And so we're working on educational materials that, the organization can send out. Maybe they send it out every quarter and it just says, last month or last quarter, we were able to recycle this many cartridges, and that translated into keeping this many pounds of plastic and metal out of the landfill. Make sure when you're purchasing a product that you look for this box. This is equivalent to the OEM, but it'll help us reach our environmental goals. So you can find those pieces in there as well. And we are more than open to creating new pieces. We just need to hear from you. Please, talk to your sales rep and let them know if there's things that, you feel would be really helpful. We're more than happy to put those together. And with that, that concludes our presentation, and we're going to start the Q&A portion.
Thank you, Kelly. And we did have quite a few questions come through during the presentation. The first one I'm going to be throwing to Steve Noyes. Steve, the question is, do you see any other trends in the federal government that suggest a focus on environmental sustainability and climate change?
Thank you, Tim. Absolutely. Specifications and purchasing priorities can originate in the federal government and then scale to the other platforms. We can point to several examples. For example, yesterday, the executive branch released heat.gov to help create awareness of climate change. Last Monday, on the 25th, the GSA announced the appointment of Jetta Wong as the senior advisor to the administrator on climate. On July 7th, GSA announced it was considering language to revise policies to reduce single-use plastics. This could integrate a similar position that the city of Los Angeles adopted concerning the elimination of single-use plastic compatible cartridges. The executive administration is working to standardize how companies measure and report their carbon footprint. This project is being pursued so companies can have a uniform starting point and then over time report the ESG steps they are taking to reduce their carbon footprint. The intention is to create a selection criteria that delivers a preference to companies with the lowest carbon footprint. Other examples include to be eligible to sell imaging supplies on the 40 billion multiple award schedule, dealers must provide a recovery solution. GSA has adopted the industry's taxonomy of terms. This language guides how imaging supplies can be listed on the multiple award schedule as either OEM, remanufactured, non-OEM, new build alternative, or the legacy term refilled. Compatible is not an accepted search term. And finally, recently, GSA defined the term remanufactured as factory rebuilt to OEM specifications. As GSA steps into the verified product portal and the common catalog platform, enforcement will be noticeable.
So thank you, Steve. And I'm actually going to keep it with you for this next question, which is, does Clover have any examples or a case study that explains how this messaging has been leveraged to capture new business?
Absolutely. We can reference the IRS. They released an RFQ for a 5-year blanket purchase agreement that specified either compatibles or the OEM. We invited clarity on the ambiguous language and then submitted a formal pre-award bid protest before the bid closed. This suspended the request for quote. It resulted in a request for information where we provided language on the Clover experience specification, including the collection recycling solution. After changing the language in a revised RFQ, the blanket purchase agreement was won by a partner dealer with Ability One Skillcraft brand and the Clover brand. We can also reference We can also reference the Department of Energy. They host a website called www.fedcenter.gov, fedcenter.gov. This is the federal government's home for comprehensive environmental stewardship and compliance assistance information for federal facility managers and their agencies. On this site, the Department of Energy provides instructions for an OEM version, and they define Clover and Clover brands as best in class, and they provide consumer references.
Thank you, Steve.
Mhm.
All right, and our next question, Kelly, I think this one will be for you. What states have restrictions on single-use plastic, and what material or support does Clover offer or provide to help their partners get the most out of these regulations?
So the answer to that is that this is really evolving by the day. There are several states that have legislation. Some of it's at the local level, some of it's at the state level. And so it's really evolving. We have very much tried to create a repository of all of the pro-reman laws, any legislation that is, currently on the books or current legislation that is being discussed. So really your best bet is if you have an opportunity, come to us and let us see what we can find for you, and we can collaborate on that. And then, we'll be able to, maybe find some things that you hadn't thought of, and Steve Noyes is a great resource for that as well.
Thank you, Kelly. And then I'm actually going to keep it with you for one more, Kelly. It's regarding the CO2 emissions. Is Clover using publicly accessible /EPA accredited formulas for CO2 emissions?
We are, yes. If you go and look at our environmental calculator that's on the website, you'll actually see the citation for that. And the environmental calculator is actually something that we can give you some code for, and you can actually embed that in your website. That's another great way if you have a prospect and they want to see, in a very tangible way, how can I reduce my, emissions? You can plug in their cartridge usage right on your website or our website, and you can show them right away what those savings would be. And I can tell you from experience, these sustainability departments really love the metrics.
Thank you, Kelly. Our next question I'm going to send over to AJ. You mentioned you covered the slide regarding the cost savings. The question is, going green in current economic climates might be seen as second to cost cutting. Should emphasis be placed on instead of price rather than sustainability, like Clover's branding seems to suggest?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I know I answered a little bit of it there towards the end of my spiel, but one of the things I'd encourage all of you to remember, selling specifically on price, not always the best case scenario, but absolutely going to be something that people look at, cost savings measurements coming into possibly a recession or at least a downturn. So price is going to be a hot button for a lot of your customers. And if you can get into the right person and explain to them all of the environmental or sustainable benefits of our cartridges, and then convince them to also, start pushing the cost saving measurements. Utilizing both is the best case scenario, not prioritizing one or the other, because like I had said, there's not that many green solutions out there that are going to be less expensive than what that company is currently doing. So if a company is under crunch to save money and they're also trying to hit metrics, this is really a perfect storm for those types of situations. So utilizing both is best case.
Thank you, AJ. And I'm also going to keep this next question with you. There were a couple of questions that I'm going to group together here regarding educating customers, the end user, on the difference between the remanufactured and the compatible aftermarket ink and toner cartridges. What would be the best way to clear up those misconceptions or educate the clients without overwhelming them with information?
A couple different things is keep it simple, ask questions. If somebody's had issues with them in the past, or if they've got specific things that they're hung up on, always ask those questions and kind of try to keep it as simple as possible. There's a lot of information that's out there, but when it comes to the difference between our cartridges and the Chinese compatibles, just letting that customer know that one is actually remanufactured utilizing the core of the OEM. So it's got a better grade of plastic. Like I had said before, the quality is going to be better. Anything that comes in overseas could be possibly patent infringing IP, not IP cleared, and then also is going to have lower quality of everything and not hit those measurements for sustainability. But I'd also encourage you, if you ever get into a situation and you don't feel comfortable answering questions or you're worried about a specific pitch coming up, don't ever hesitate to reach out to myself or your sales rep over here. We are more than happy to jump on a call with you on behalf of your company to sell side by side with you and help you close a deal. So if you're ever worried about it, please let us know and we will assist you where we can.
Thank you, AJ. And our next question, Steve, I'm going to nominate you for this one. There was mention that Chinese clones contain carcinogens. Can you expand on what that means so the customer can be properly educated and all those that are purchasing them?
Absolutely. Yeah. As Kelly mentioned earlier, this is also an evolving category, an evolving answer. But what we know today is that single-use plastic may contain a dangerous chemical called deca-BDE. And this is a toxic flame retardant found in some plastics. Deca-BDE is a known carcinogen so powerful that the largest commercial producers and suppliers of deca-BDE in the US agreed to phase out the use of this chemical in 2013. It's now banned in US imports. It's also banned in the European Union. When the deca-BDE laden cartridges are heated, they potentially release toxins. And the toner inside the cartridge can be heated up to 800 degrees by the laser. The European Trade Association for Cartridge Remanufacturers, known as ITERA, sent several Asian-built cartridges to an independent lab in Germany in 2018. That lab found large quantities of deca-BDE in some of the new-built cartridge bodies. In 2019, in the US, the International Imaging Technology Council sent several Asian-made cartridges to an independent lab in Georgia, and they found similar problems. In some cases, the cartridges contained up to 150 times the amounts of deca-BDE considered safe. Also, benzene, cobalt, and naphthalene has also been found in certain toner formulations. The carcinogenic effects associated with these chemicals include genetic defects, cancer, and asthma. A new ITERA study tested new builds bought on Amazon in Europe and all released unacceptable levels of these toxic chemicals. Remanufactured cartridges do not. This is a complex and evolving category. I think for more information, I would guide any of our listeners to visit www.epa.gov and search Toxics Release Inventory, or you can visit the International Imaging Technology Council, IITC.org.
Thank you, Steve. And AJ, the next question I'm going to direct over to you. You went over the breakdown of the cartridge when it's deemed to be past life and is broken down for its base plastics. And you mentioned that compatibles are too brittle for manufacturing. Can you explain why those are not recyclable either?
Well, part of the answer Steve just answered is, people that we partner with and to reuse that plastic really don't want that grade of plastic anywhere near their manufacturing. So if it's got any of the components that Steve just mentioned that have names longer than I can pronounce, then they don't want those plastics. And then on top of it, just the quality of that plastic is a lower grade. So whenever they're reusing that, once again, whether or not it's melted and reused or broken down, however, the plastic grade is such a low quality that it's not going to produce a good finished good, regardless of what that finished good is. So our partners that we work with do not want that plastic whenever we sell off or give them our plastic. And most companies are not going to want to utilize that here in the States. So that's, I know, not a perfect answer, but that's really the gist of it.
Awesome, thank you. And AJ, I'm going to keep these next couple questions with you because they're product specific. The first of which is typically how many times can a cartridge be recycled?
So it's going to vary from line to line. Obviously, all of you who've been doing this for a long time know that the differences between an HP 5SI cartridge and the newer cartridges that are out is massive difference. So it's going to depend line by line how many times we can reuse it, but and it's stated on a couple of different places on our website if you look for it. But I know that certain models can be used multiple times, and some even up to 10 times can be reused. So it just depends on the model, and obviously the stat or the integrity of the cartridge, and how good condition it is whenever it gets back to us. So multiple times it can be reused.
Thank you, AJ. And part two of the question is, how do you determine what cartridges are viable for remanufacturing?
So I'm looking at the question here, and I know that they're asking about particular cartridges that haven't come out in the last couple of years, and not all the time is that, are we looking at specific cartridges in terms of what we can manufacture based off of our, the OEM or technology that we've, a lot of times it just comes down to components. In particular, this question that I'm looking at here, it's referencing the Lexmark CX310. Pretty sure in those situations, it's either going to be just the chip technology is something that can't be replicated yet, or we, comfortable about the build or the toner formulation. A lot of times it doesn't have to do with anything other than just making sure that we get quality product out to our customers. We don't want to obviously launch something that we're not comfortable with, or if it can't buy a chip for it. So.
Thank you, AJ. I'm going to quickly answer a question regarding the content of the slide and where it will be available. The slide or the webinar recording, as well as the individual graphics and one sheets, will be available on the cloverimaging.com website in either the webinar recording section or the partner marketing portal that Kelly reviewed shortly before the end of our content. And then the final question that we have, I'm going to send over to Steve Noyes regarding, are there any other compatible clones to look out for that are not from Chinese manufacturers?
So if you consider the who is importing and how much comes from the 5 major, and it's in the public domain, we can all quote those big guys that are coming in. Most of the factories are in China. The smaller ones outside, I'm not familiar with, but most of the compatibles originate from China, and most of them are new build alternatives with single-use plastic.
Yeah, so they'll have the same issues. Thank you, Steve. And that is the extent of the Q&A section that we have. If there are any questions that you can't quite think of, or if you think of as soon as we finish up here, please get with your rep, and they'd be more than happy to get you connected with the correct person if they can't answer it themselves. But with that, I would like to thank everyone for joining us. I'd like to once again thank Kelly, Steve, and AJ for coordinating this time today. And on behalf of myself and Clover, thank all of our attendees for spending some of their afternoon with us. And we hope that you found it enjoyable and informative. As a reminder, like I mentioned, the Clover marketing team will make this recording of the presentation available for anyone who joined late, left early, or was unable to attend. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.